This fall, the U.S. Supreme Court could hear arguments on a case that would make Citizens United look like the Bill of Rights, and it would completely hand our elections over to corporations. Joining me now to talk about that case and what it means for our democracy is Attorney Howard Nations. So Howard, we thought the U.S. Supreme Court really dinged democracy really bad in Citizens United. What they're getting ready to look at in the McCutcheon case is it makes that look like a walk through the park. Tell us about that case.
Well, Citizens United, as it turns out, was just a warm-up. Now we're down to McCutcheon versus FEC, which is attacking the overall contribution limitations. And the law now is that under the FEC rules, under the 2013-2014 election cycle, a donor is limited to $123,200 to all political committees. Then there's sublimits of $48,600 to candidates, $74,600 to parties or PACs. This decision, McCutcheon decision, is raising the issue as to whether overall contribution limits or aggregate limits are unconstitutional as a denial of free speech.
Okay, so let me get this right. Right now you have, of course, the regulations for elections have already been just obliterated with Citizens United.
Right.
So the only thing we have out there is saying you can't take all of this money, these limitations, and then aggregate it and put it with, say, the Republican Party. You can't do that now and get away with it because it's illegal. So now what they want to go in is they want to say, no, we want to aggregate. We think it's our First Amendment right to do that. What is the impact of that? What happens with that?
Well, it would effectively eliminate individual contribution caps. They say we're not attacking individual contribution caps, we're attacking aggregate contribution caps. But if you have you could shift among fundraising committees. Now, Buckley, the Supreme Court in Buckley looked at this some years ago and said that aggregate contribution limits are an extension of individual caps. And they specifically said that things such as $1 million contributions give the appearance of corruption. And in some cases, as with the Nixon administration, it led to actual corruption. But the RNC is saying, no, Citizens United has effectively abolished limits, because now you can contribute to super PACs or you can contribute to non-disclosing nonprofits, and as a result, many states have had to raise their limits for their individual candidates because they're having to fight those super PACs.
Well, we know that Citizens United, of course, we've seen in the last elections, it puts the elections in the hands of corporations. I don't know how you can get anything more extreme than this. I mean, as far as saying a corporation can hand, I think the aggregate would be somewhere around $5 million, maybe
right.
$6 million in aggregate, that you can just say that to Republicans here, take this, do what you want with it. And that is putting that corporation or that billionaire inheritance baby that nowadays runs elections, you're putting them at odds with the average citizen who, if they can give $25, that's remarkable most of the time. Where does this end, Howard? How does it possibly end with this Supreme Court majority that we have right now?
Well, there are three possibilities for the Supreme Court in this case. First of all, they can strike down aggregate limits, say they don't exist anymore, they're unconstitutional. Secondly, they can uphold aggregate limits and things continue as they are. The mid-ground for the Supreme Court would be to uphold the constitutional of aggregate limits, but hold that the limits are so low as to be unconstitutional. If that happens, then Congress would have to set the new limits following the Supreme Court mandate.
Well, Howard, you've talked about the fact that our only way out of this, I think you were one of the first people really in the business talking about the seriousness of the need for a constitutional amendment to change all of this. Is that really, with the public's reaction to what's happening to them, do you think that that's really an outside possibility? I mean, doesn't that become more of a probability every day as we see corporations now take control of our election process?
I'm afraid it's wishful thinking, Mike. I cannot imagine 35 states agreeing on anything these days.
Well, if you don't have the 35 states agreeing to, if you don't have that number of states agreeing, you certainly can go to the polls. And I'm wondering whether this McCutcheon decision just might be enough to do that once people understand how crazy the impact is on these aggregate numbers. What's your thought on that?
Well, the case is going to be argued on October 8th, just in time for the 2014 midterms. If we see in the 2014 midterms, if they knock down these aggregate limits, and we see an even greater flood of money, and we see individual politicians being bought by individual donors,
we might have a possibility.
You may have a possibility.
Howard Nations, thanks for following this story. My bet is when I look at this majority, they're going to grant this aggregate expansion of campaign money. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Mike.